Hello and welcome to the Next Game Win podcast. I'm joined today with my colleague Warren, as always, but today we have a special guest, Steve, who is the CEO of simracing.gp. Steve, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Steve from simracing.gp. I'm the CEO there, and we're only a small team, so CEO sounds a little bit bigger than it really is. That we're only a team of about 6. We have built an esports platform for sim racing. And for those that don't know what sim racing is, it's sort of like virtual motorsport. Sort of more like on the realistic side of things rather than sort of like games like Gran Turismo or Forza. So it's more about sort of like the replicating real world motorsport in the virtual space. We've built this tournament platform, and it's going quite well. But before that, I've got a background in consumer tech. Used to work for HTC Vive, the VR headsets, which I'm sure you guys know about. But sim racing's been my hobby for the last 20 years. It's always been a bit of a nerdy hobby, actually, because having all of this kit, especially with friends who like football, they always thought that this sort of stuff is really, really nerdy. So it was always trying to keep this out of the way. But actually, it seems like sim racing and like racing games have become actually quite popular recently. So now I've got my mates who are like Chelsea fans, like Yobs, like texting me saying, "Can I come and have a go on your rig?" So it's just it's crazy. So yeah, it's great to see like sim racing is actually becoming a bit more of a normal thing.
No, that's sweet. And in terms of sort of the level of tournament, then is it sort of a big numbers that attend these tournaments, or is it how does your company work? Do you host it, or do you how do you work really?
Yeah, so we're basically, the idea of SimRacingGP is that if you're looking for a race, so if you're a driver and you're looking for a race, you can come on to SimRacingGP, and we've got over 150 communities on there now. We've got esports tournaments on there. You'll be able to find a race, basically. So normally what you would do is you would load up a game, you would go to the in-game lobby browser, and then you'd join a public lobby because, what other choice have you got? And then you may or may not get a good race. There'll definitely be no one looking at it from a stewarding perspective. So it can tend to be pretty chaotic, the public lobbies. What we've done is we've built a set of tools for organisers to come and host races on the platform. So like I say, we've got 150 odd communities on there now that they're using the platform to set races up and set championships and tournaments up for other people. So a couple of the big communities on there, SimRacing 604 is a YouTuber from Canada. He's got the biggest North American sim racing community hosted on SimRacingGP now, which has got like nearly 6,000 or over 6,000 people in it. He uses the platform to create these championships for other people to enjoy. The grids are really populated, and they do like live stewarding. So they'll have people in the server, not racing, just watching how people are driving. And if they hit someone, they'll be like, right, 5-second penalty there or disqualification there. So they really take it seriously. We've got one community who have got a rule book that's like 20 pages long. It's like proper motorsport style, levels of stewarding. So they take it really seriously, and we absolutely love that. So there's the community side of it, but then we've got the pro esports as well. So we've done, I think it's 6 pro esports championships now, where there's prizes up for grabs, and various brands have got involved. So we've had Fanatec, who are probably the biggest sim racing manufacturer. In fact, actually, you can see just down there some Fanatec pedals. So these guys, they're the biggest manufacturer in the scene. They've done some tournaments on there. But right now we've got the TCR Virtual Series, which is the TCR are the guys that do the real world touring car racing all over the world. So if you're watching touring car racing, it's 9 times out of 10, if not, I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, it's going to be TCR, and they've chosen SimRacingGP as the platform to do all of their virtual racing. So we've got 8,000 people have taken part in a or registered to take part in TCR virtual. And the idea of SimRacingGP and Pro Esports is that we're trying to get away from hot lap qualifying. And hot lap qualifying is basically where you jump onto a server, set a hot lap, and then come out. And whoever's like in the top 40 would normally go into the championship. The problem with that is people like me, I'm really slow. I've got no chance. I'll see the Pro Esports guys on there. I wouldn't even bother taking part. So we've built a platform which gets people racing. So we've done like a knockout tournament. Think like FA Cup style knockout tournaments where it's you've got to race. The top 50% of the finishers go through to the next round. The bottom 50% get knocked out, and it means everyone gets a race, at least one race, right? So so yeah, we've built a set of tools that mean that you can like if you're a brand or like a community or a driver, you're gonna be able to go on there and race and have a good time. Sorry, long answer.
No, it's fine. It was brilliant. And how have you found that sort of transition over the years and people, the uptake of that? Because, esports, especially, from our experience, early Call of Duty days, early FIFA tournament days, esports wasn't taken very seriously and sort of was seen as a bit of a gimmick. But recently, obviously, esports has been going at such a fast speed and a certain trajectory. So, has the last sort of few years just been mental with the uptake of previous doubters, I guess?
Yeah, well, the biggest so we've only been running for about a year and a half, and it was, I think, just before COVID, we were talking about SimRacingGP as like an idea, and the biggest problem that we faced was trying to convince motorsport organizations that sim racing was more than a computer game. And it's that was really difficult, right? Because if you've got all of these real world motorsport teams that are putting millions of pounds into developing these real world cars, and then you're coming along saying, hey, we've got this software that costs 50 quid. And you can set up a rig. This rig here is pretty like intense, but actually you don't need all of this kit to be quick in a sim. So you can pay 50 quid for the game, a couple of £100 for a set of wheels and pedals plus your computer, and you can start training to be a real world motorsport driver. And they didn't like that idea. They put millions of pounds into the investments of their like young driver programs and their teams and their equipment and cars and stuff. So it was like they never really got it. And then COVID happened, and they had no choice. It was like
I was just going to say, do you think COVID had a bit of a helping hand?
Massive. It was absolutely massive because all motorsport got cancelled. So what are your options? So either do nothing or go virtual. So everyone went virtual. And I think that's when the motorsport community was like, okay, we've actually got to take this seriously, because I shot a video with my mate. We went over to BMW in Munich, and he got to drive the BMW simulator that they use for the real world testing teams. And the platform that they use is a software called rFactor 2, and rFactor 2 Pro or rFactor Pro. And the pro bit of that is that there's the real world physics simulation. The graphics aren't that great because the computer's doing so much work on the physics engine and working out the calculations of the car, the suspension, the aero, all of this stuff. The graphics aren't really that important. It looks all right. It looks okay, but it's not that important. But the pro bit is you can prototype a part in virtual for the real world. So you can test like a new rear wing on your car, and you can test it in the virtual space. And if it looks like the data comes back and it looks like it could be an improvement, they'll make it for the real world car.
So it just enables rapid prototyping.
Exactly, right? So rapid prototyping 10 years ago was 3D printing and like some crazy stuff like that, which was really like insanely expensive. Now they can just go, okay, 3D design, which is still fairly expensive to get someone who can do that, but 3D design, get someone to create this in the virtual space and test it. But the interesting thing is, if you remove that pro part of R Factor, you've got the same software that we have on our computers. So the bit that we don't do, or the consumer doesn't have, is all of that aero and all of the data that comes off. So like there was servers, like racks of servers of like capturing all of this data from this simulator. But the consumer version doesn't have all of that because they've no need to rapidly prototype aero parts.
No.
They just want to have fun racing. But fundamentally, it's the same software. So the software is really sophisticated. And I think that's when the team started to go, okay, this is serious. These guys aren't just playing games. They're using the same software that we've got. And we're spending millions on our prototyping and simulating programs. So, the people started realizing that this is a bit more than just a game, and it's just gone crazy since COVID. Now it's that every brand on the planet is looking at esports. Like motorsport brands are looking at esports and how they can get involved. So it's had a huge impact.
I guess their eyes have been lit up by the pure currency of it all as well. I mean, you know, racing and motorsports is, it's an exclusive and very unaccessible sport for a lot of people. It's not like taking a ball onto a park and kicking it about a bit. You have to go through quite a lot of effort and money to get to that point. So, being able to, as you said, buy a couple of bits that are quite inexpensive, they must think, well, we can go from this many sort of active people in the industry to this amount who are willing to sort of pay to just have a go. So now it's just blowing up. Crazy.
And this is the thing, is that I always say this to my mates who I've got one mate of mine in particular who's like, I don't know if he still quite gets what I do. And he doesn't quite understand sim racing. And the moment where I think maybe the penny started to drop for him, I don't think it's completely dropped for him, was I was like, look, you can train on the sim racing, like for all the reasons I just said about the software, and with a good set of kit. Like the inputs that you put into the wheel, like this is a direct drive wheel, this is a SimuCube, like top of the range wheelbase. So kicks out some sort of ridiculous amount of Newton meters of torque. I don't know, I'm not that technical, but it simulates the forces that a real world driver would feel. So there's you can't replicate G forces, but you can replicate sustained G through the wheel, like so. So the inputs that you put into the wheel, the inputs that you put into the pedals, handbrakes and stuff, it's basically 1-to-1 now. So you can really train on here. And I was saying to him, I was like, you couldn't take the best FIFA player on the planet and put them on a football pitch. Like they would never perform. That they might, by some miracle, they might be like as good as a professional footballer. Chances are they're probably not. You could take the best sim racers out of their sim rig, put them in a car, and they're going to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. I mean, this guy here, this is my mate Jimmy. He's a YouTuber, and he went from control pad to wheel to better and better wheel. Until last year or this year, beginning of this year, Praga, the car that he's driving here, said, we want to give you a chance to race in the real world, and gave him a drive, and he won the last race of the season.
Wow.
So
That's
he's
incredible.
Yeah, he's like his story is absolutely amazing, but it proves that you can take people out of a sim rig, put them into a car, and they know what they're doing. So I think the more that happens, the more that it will become accepted that sim racing is a good entry point for motorsport.
I think it's absolutely a really fascinating discussion point that you've just mentioned there, because obviously if we look at sort of sim racing under the banner of esports in general, it really is a separate entity in that if we look at some of the major games that are, at the top of many esports leagues, Call of Duty, Fortnite, CS:GO, things like that, I'm generalizing and I'm perhaps being a bit unfair, but if you take a typical Call of Duty player and drop them in a war zone,
No
are they going to be able to handle an assault rifle? And
No
so
chance.
there is a certain head and shoulders above sense of authenticity that certainly lends itself with sort of, obviously having that kind of kit and having an indicative idea of what the real world experience will look like. I think one question I've got really in regards to that, obviously, the competitive nature of sort of sim racing. Do you find that, and again, this is pure naivety on my part, but do you find sort of the tech that people have at home, the rig that they have at home, can give them an advantage, a disadvantage, or is it pretty much standard across the board? Do you have to have an expensive wheel and pedals in order to succeed, or what are the sort of the intricacies of sort of the different salary, the different sort of price brackets with sort of kit that what's the difference between an entry level sort of bit of kit and someone who's perhaps got a rig that's in the thousands perhaps?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm glad that my usual audience won't be necessarily tuned into this particular podcast because I say this answer a lot. But there's a guy on SimRacingGP called Nicholas Alvarado, Argentinian guy. Even if he wanted to buy a wheel that cost 200 quid, he couldn't because the import taxes were so insane. Because like a 200 wheel was costing like over 1,300 quid. It was insane.
Jesus.
So he was using mouse and keyboard, and he was one of the quickest guys on the platform. And it was like, what the hell? When we found out that this guy was using mouse and keyboard, we were like, you've got to be kidding me. And I think like the community that he was racing with clubbed together to buy him a wheel, and they sent it over to him. And obviously he was very grateful. But he continued to be quick when he got the wheel and pedals. So he's just naturally like understands how this stuff works. But that's the answer, right? He had a potato PC with a mouse and keyboard and was one of the quickest guys on the platform.
Yeah, he was licking people.
Yeah, really, and it's insane. Like he's now like a proper esports driver. Like that's right. Like he's that sort of level. But the thing with the kit is it's designed to like increase immersion rather than give you an advantage. Right. So you can spend like this rig here. I think I worked it out the other day. I think cost about 10 grand. I'm one of the slowest on the platform, but I definitely have the most fun because, like I say, the inputs that I get from the wheel, the pedals that I've got, the pedals that I've got here they're called Venom. They're a new brand, but they've taken real world pedal technology and put it into essentially a game controller. But it's got what's called a 100 kilo load cell, which is about, if you imagine a Formula One car, I think they could the maximum level of force that you can put on a brake pedal is 120 kilos. So this is nearly the same as an F1 car, but you have to put that sort of level of force. It's like a workout for your leg. Again, like, does it make you quicker? Maybe, but it's just more fun.
Yeah.
So you can get a Logitech wheel for a couple of £100 and be rapid and have a lot of fun. Just spending more just gives you a more immersive experience. There is one thing where I do think it makes you quicker is with a direct drive wheel, which I've got here, versus a belt drive, which is what you would find with a Logitech or a Thrustmaster that you might get from like Curry's or something, is that the sort of level of detail of the movements that it gives you through the wheel are so precise that you can be more consistent. And consistency over sort of like some of the races, we do 24-hour races, right? So consistency over 24 hours will make you quicker. So it's not like you're going to get seconds and seconds out of these things, but there is that element where if you can be more consistent over a period of time, inevitably it will make you quicker. But
it's like what they say in boxing, and it's better to be accurate than quick.
Yeah, exactly. But hopefully that answers the question. You don't need to spend thousands of pounds to get into sim racing. It is quite accessible.
I bet it's easy to sort of. Sorry, go on, Warren.
No, I was going to say this is exactly it. I think, for someone who is perhaps considering dabbling, the trap that he's easily fallen into is, I'm going to have to, sell a kidney to sort of set up my rig.
Yeah.
But it is nice to sort of have that reassurance that in some respects it is, it's easily sort of entered into in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally go down to Curry's now. I was in Curry's the other day, bought this headset. Didn't have a headset. I was like, I need to get one. So I went into Curry's, bought a headset, and they've got a whole sim racing section now. And it's like, that's pretty amazing. Like, again, like 10 years ago, it would never have happened. They've got like Logitech wheels, Thrustmaster wheels, starting from, I think, about 40 quid. 40, 50 quid. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to give you all the sort of force feedback that you'd probably want, but it's better than a control pad and it's better than a keyboard and mouse. So I would definitely say if you've got any sort of desire to give this a go, don't go in and spend hundreds of pounds off the bat, because it's hard. It's like, this stuff, these games, they're unforgiving, right? And it's not for everyone. So a lot of people sort of come in, they try it, and they're expecting maybe like a Forza 5, like Horizon sort of experience, where it's just like pick up a gamepad and go, and you're going to have fun. It's not that. You need to put in a bit of practice. I mean, just before we got on this call, I was like, we're just setting up the camera, and I just had to go on the new rally game, the WRC rally game, and it's like if you're not concentrating, it's like, forget it. Like, I was like, my mind was on other things. I was like, I've got the podcast today. I've got this call. I've got that. I've got this thing. And I was crashing if you're not concentrating in these games, they're just like, it's not fun. but that's what makes it fun.
I did a sort of 4D rally experience in Leeds, funnily enough. And it was the full sort of rig, and with a sort of HTC headset on. And I was doing it with a lad who didn't have a driver's license, has never driven before. And I was saying, I'll beat you, mate. I'll absolutely batter you at it. Thinking, because I've got a license, I'll be able to translate that really easy onto the racing game. And he just absolutely battered me at it. I was going around in circles. I had to reverse. I was like, this is far too hard.
Yeah.
But it was incredible, that sort of, because they had the sort of rumble, they had the wind, and then they had the sort of reactive steering wheel and all that kind of stuff as well. It was kind of crazy.
The VR is like, takes sim racing to another level. It's just everyone's sat in a car, right? And the thing with VR is like, if you think about like I can't think of. I used to work for HTC, and I can't think of any sort of like massive VR games. But
Blood and Truth.
Say again.
There's a title called Blood and Truth that me and Warren love.
Okay, and what is that?
It's you ever played? Go on, The Getaway. You ever played The Getaway on the
PlayStation? Like a London gangster sort of heist.
Hyper realistic sort of gangster shoot 'em up kind of title.
Okay, so it's like a real world sort of environment.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was thinking more along the lines of like the zombie games and like Beat Saber and stuff like that, right? So, it's kind of like when people put a VR headset on and they go into those games, they have a lot of fun. But like Beat Saber is like an unnatural environment. You've got things flying at you. You've got these things. Everyone's been in a car. When you put a VR headset on and you can feel the wheel in front of you, and you're sat in your rig and you're looking around and you can see the windows and you can see the handbrake and stuff. It's like that's an experience that everyone can relate to, and they're like, oh my god, this is crazy. And again, when you start racing with it, it's just like the immersion levels just go through the roof. And I remember the first time that I properly tried VR with sim racing, I binned it at some corner in some track, and I took my hands off the wheels, wheel, and I was like, oh god, and I was really bracing for this impact that obviously never came. But it was like that's the level of immersion that VR gives you, and with all of these inputs and stuff, it's quite easy to get very lost in that world.
I think there's quite an interesting discussion point that you've just mentioned there, Paul, that someone such as yourself with a driving license was beaten by someone without a driving license, who I'm guessing would have had previous sort of video game PC sort of gaming experience. And it sort of reminds me of a quote from many years ago. I think it was when I was a teenager, and I remember reading it because my parents were sort of sort of taking the mick out of me for it. It was people who played racing video games, and we're going back 20 plus years, but people who played racing video games will grow up to be bad drivers. And it was one of these knee-jerk newspaper, and I think at the time, don't get me wrong, I think I was playing Driver or even Road Rash prior to that. We're talking there the games of the era, but you sort of flash forward sort of 20 years, and we're now looking at people where the level of immersion and authenticity is so great that skill set can be accurately transposed across. And I think
definitely
one question that absolutely springs to mind with me is, yes, absolutely, we're here to discuss the competitive nature of it and the esport sort of thematic usage of it. Can it be applied in other ways, do you think? Can it be used at the early stages of someone's driving lessons?
Absolutely. I'll give you one example. This is from 2005, I think it was. I was driving a Vauxhall Corsa. It was pouring down with rain. I wasn't paying much attention. Looked up, and there's a car about, I don't know, however many feet in front of me, and I'm like, okay, didn't even think about it. Oh my god, wheel's still on. Turn the wheel. I missed this car by inches, and that was all like those reflexes, what to do with the car at the time. It was like that all was learned through sim racing. So again, I didn't have this sort of kit back then. I only had like a really basic sort of self-centering Logitech wheel, but it was just instinct, because the physics engines in the Sims, even back then, were good enough that I could actually learn some car handling techniques, right? So I knew that if I turn the car really sharply like that, the back is going to follow it later, and I'm going to have to counter steer it. And I corrected it. I was just like that was the moment I was like, my God, this stuff's actually really good. But yeah, look, you can you don't have to race with sim racing. There's a lot of open world maps. Assetto Corsa is probably the biggest sim racing title on PC, where there's people modify that game with open world maps, like hundreds of square kilometers of just open world, where you can literally just go and learn to drive. Again, if you think about, all of the inputs are exactly the same. So I've got a set of 3 pedals here: clutch, brake, and accelerator. I can set it all up exactly as it's just like if when my son's old enough to learn driving, I'll just put him in here and say, hey, right, okay, let me tell you the basics in here, because you can like feel the biting point on the car with some pedals, because it's got like haptic feedback in the pedals and stuff. So you can feel things like that. So yeah, absolutely can translate that stuff into real world driving.
Cool.
It's amazing as well as like I've watched quite a bit of Euro Truck Simulator on Twitch, and it's outstanding how people are willing to sit for hours and hours on end driving a simulated truck from Antwerp to Brighton.
Mate,
mental.
Can you give me 2 seconds, because I've got some stats on Euro Truck Simulator which just blew my mind.
Go for it.
Because obviously we're in this sim racing bubble. We think, oh yeah, everyone's going to want to race. Everyone's in it to be the fastest esports driver. It's like, nah, forget it. So the Assetto Corsa, like I say, the biggest sim racing title on PC. These are just Steam stats. 24-hour peak, 6,000 players. Assetto Corsa Competizione, which is the new version of Assetto Corsa, 4,000. Blah blah blah. You go through like F1, 11,000. Euro Truck Simulator, 37,000. Forza Horizon 5 is right. Okay, so Euro Truck Simulator, 37,635. Forza Horizon 5, 37,924. Euro Truck Simulator is really popular. Really popular. I never knew that. Crazy.
I'm missing out.
I've seen as well as that they're starting to create sort of like, I don't know what you call it, like rigs for like farm simulator and things like that as well. That's becoming like massively popular as well. It's just amazing how
just
much
the whole dash of a combine harvester.
I think they can do them, right? I think they exist. I was at Gamescom a couple of years ago, and I was just blown away. Like I was with Vive again. we didn't even have a stand because we couldn't afford it. So we would partnered with various people like MediaMarkt and whoever. So there was loads of Vive at the show, but we didn't have our own stand because we couldn't afford it. Walked into one of the halls. The second biggest stand in that hall was Euro Truck Simulator. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And like Farming Simulator, same guys. And it's just like, those games are really popular.
You've got Lawnmower Simulator as well now.
Yeah.
For the winter seasons, if you want to cut your grass in the winter.
Name a simulator that there isn't at the moment, though. There seems to be a simulator for everything.
They went through. It was sort of that 2016, 17, 18 period where, everything was just being simulated. It was.
Simulator.
I was
going to say I was going to jokingly reply with goat, but
yeah, it was crazy. But in terms of sort of the esports scene, then I mean, do you sort of do these tournaments? Do you sort of put them on Twitch, and what's the sort of viewership like for these kind of things?
Yeah, so esports is a funny one. I'm still in two minds about esports and motorsport. I think obviously esports pros, esports teams will say that I've got this wrong, but motorsport is fairly niche, right? Outside of Formula One, motorsport is, you've got to really be into motorsport to watch anything outside of Formula One. I mean, I'm a huge motorsport fan. And I mean, I couldn't tell you what the championship status is of near enough any motorsport formula outside of Formula One. And I'm a huge motorsport fan. So like for you to be like really engaged in a championship like the World GT Challenge, which is like all Porsches, Ferraris, Lamborghinis and stuff, like you've got to really be into it. And the problem with that is that, I mean, like, look at the F1 race at the weekend, is that, the best drivers in the world, in the best cars in the world, the race was boring. And it's like, when the F1 race is boring, it's like, oh, it's a little bit of a chore. We're simulating real world motorsport, right? So if a simulated race gets boring, it's like, it's even worse. So it's like, this is where I think it's like the viewership is, I think there's definitely a dedicated following in motorsport, esport, but I think it's largely driven by the people involved. So the prize money the maximum prize money that I've seen is 25 grand for a motorsport esports competition. Wow. So
it's quite low, isn't it?
It's really, I mean, it's terribly low compared to
3.5 million for Fortnite, that kind of thing.
Exactly, right. But the thing is, it's like the viewership. Like, so for example, we did a 10-hour race at Silverstone the other day, and we got 120,000 views, I think it was, which is all right. It's okay. But it's again like, why would a brand spend millions of quid for 120k? And we've got one of I'd say when it comes to esports broadcasting, we've probably got one of the biggest reach. We partner with people like Ferrari and SRO, the guys who do World Challenge, like last couple of years, not this year, but last couple of years. That they'll come to us and say, look, can you broadcast our race for us because the reach that we have? And yeah, I mean, we're talking about 25 grand for the winner. So it's like, it's not huge. The thing is, like I say, the esports teams, esports pros will say it's only going to get bigger. And I can see it getting bigger, but I'm just wondering at what point, these investments, are they going to carry on coming in? So the likes of, these big brands putting in hundreds of thousands of pounds for their esports tournament. Are they going to keep doing that? Is the question that I've got at the moment. I think it will level out. I think it will be a case of we'll understand that it was never going to reach the likes of like Call of Duty and like Fortnite and stuff. I think that we have to, or I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to sit just below that. But I think it's going to be, rather than largely driven by the people involved, I think it's going to be driven by the motorsport community. So, for example, F1 their esports. They've got huge reach with their YouTube channel. That's probably the best motorsport esports competition. But that's largely driven by the F1 community, right? The F1 coverage. So I think outside of F1, the next best or the next biggest one would be the Le Mans Virtual Series, and that's like millions of pounds of investment that have gone into Le Mans Virtual, and I think they got like 13,000 views in their last race. So it's like, wow. I just wonder at what point they're gonna. It's either gonna boom or it's gonna we're gonna level out and go, okay, look, we appreciate this is still going to be quite niche for people, but do you know I see some like do you know Summit 1G?
No,
Twitch
streamer.
It's got like 6 million followers on Twitch. He's just started getting into sim racing, and I'm like, okay, like maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe this is going to be bigger than I thought. But it's.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say, like, do you think it's about sort of carving out a new audience rather than relying on a previous one? You know, because F1 and motorsports in general has never been something that has been a massive interest to me, because it's not something, as I said earlier, you can't go out and spin your car around a car park, because you don't get the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not very accessible, but now it's becoming more accessible. Do you think that sort of community will just flourish and grow, especially with things like Twitch and the sort of reach that some of these people have, bringing new people into the community?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a new audience, and I think this is where just to sort of clarify my point, is that I think a lot of these brands are coming into motorsport esports under the esports umbrella, thinking this is going to be as big as Call of Duty because it's esports.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's like that. I think it's like, okay, look, it's esports, and it's probably the most realistic esports that you can get, but it's but the audience isn't gamers. The audience are motorsport fans. Like I would say 90% of the sim racing audience are motorsport fans first. They're failed racing drivers. Like I wanted to be a racing driver, didn't have the money, started sim racing. Right, that is. I don't have any other games on my PC. They're all sim racing, and I think that's where maybe some brands have misunderstood this market, where they've just gone, oh yeah, esports buzzword. What can we get involved in? Okay, let's put a load of money into sim racing. It's like it's still like sim racing as an industry is really young, right? So it's probably like, I don't know, 20 years old, something like that. And the esports element of it is, even younger still, and it's only just started to sort of gain some traction. Whereas you're talking about millions of pounds worth of prize money with existing esports. So I think there's a lot of brands that have hoped that sim racing esports would return the sort of investment that they'd get from putting into like a Call of Duty tournament or a Fortnite tournament. It's just not there yet. It's not there yet. We need to develop that audience and start engaging, doing better at telling the stories of like the heroes and in the tournaments and stuff. We don't do a very good job of that in the sim racing industry, I don't think. And I think it's going to take a bit of time, but it's definitely needs to be a new audience.
I was just going to say, inevitably, as time progresses, as you said, because it is, as an entity, it is comparatively significantly younger than some of the other, major esports sort of titles and platforms that you mentioned. As you were saying, then I was just thinking the importance of, as you say, sharing as many case studies as you can, sharing as many success stories as you can, and inevitably, as time progresses, people will become more aware to how incredibly accessible it will increasingly become. Looking back to things like Call of Duty, I know we've mentioned it a lot, but it is purely something that people have used as a means of escapism, and people have got quite good at it and thought, oh, actually, I can almost monetize this. I can add that competitive element to this. But it's almost unfair to give digital motorsport that esport sort of label from the off, because it almost gives this muddied perception of what exactly it is. Because as we said earlier, digital motorsport in many instances is a viable digital training platform as well as a form of escapism, and so it is its separate beast altogether. And that being combined with it being quite comparatively young, there's only, the foundations are there, but it just needs time, as you say, to be embedded, to establish its key characters, to establish its mass market awareness. But it's sort of definitely on its way there, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, my nephew, he's 14 years old, and he's a big fan of a guy called Jarno Upmere, who is a F1 esports driver. And so it's definitely it's on its way. I suppose my point is I just need to. I'm not sure whether we're ever going to reach those levels of like the Call of Duties and stuff. We might do. I mean, there's some really interesting projects coming up next year, which could be another indicator whether this is which direction this digital motorsport stuff's going to go. But I mean, I take nothing away from the guys who are the esports pros. They're putting in as much work as like the Fortnite guys, and they're training 8 hours a day, just like those guys, working incredibly hard. I mean, they approach this stuff in a different way, and to like the general user. I drive these cars like they're real world cars. They drive it to like eke out every 100,000th of a second per lap, and if that means doing stuff which a gamer might do but a motorsport fan might not, they're the level of that's the level of difference between these guys. But they are entertaining to watch, and they are like I say, we're still trying to find who these people are, and we're just starting to see some of these guys like come through, but it's gonna take time.
Yeah.
Do you think that sort of motorsports, should have to do a little bit more in terms of trying to soften that learning curve as well? Because, as someone who the pick up and play ability of a Call of Duty and a Fortnite, as someone who hasn't ever really taken part in anything competitive when it comes to racing, you can quickly become intimidated by the sort of scope of it and the knowledge that you would require of it. So do you think that there's some more, because it can seem quite intensely, I
think for a long time it seemed quite out of many people's reach.
Yeah,
and I think like you say, I think as time goes on, people will start to realize that actually the reach is probably there.
Yeah, I think the to answer your question, Paul, around sort of like could brands do more? I think they probably could. But there's at this point there's definitely a certain amount of assumed knowledge. So like for example, Assetto Corsa Competizione is probably I would say it's the best simulator for supercars. So like GT supercars. It's incredible, like absolutely amazing title. But if you wanted to get into a community and start racing like competitively with like not like esports levels, but just competitively with other people, I wouldn't be surprised if you got lost. Like I say, a 20-page rule book for one community. It's like
it turns a lot of people off, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It can get quite serious. I was actually speaking to my mate the other day, convinced him to get a wheel, and he started racing. He did one season. And I spoke to him just the other day, and I was like, why did you stop racing? He's like, I'm intimidated. It's just like I don't know how to set up the car. I don't know because setups are a thing. You have to know about engineering, about what tire pressures do to your car, or anti-roll bars and camber. You have to have a bit of an idea about how that stuff works. You can, like I do, just click drive and race and have a good time. You can do that. But if you want to be quick, if you want to be at the front of the pack, you have to go and do a bit of learning about how to set up a car.
Yeah.
It can get intimidating, and I think that's where actually we used to do a better job of it back in the day than we do now. There was a game called GTR 2, which came with a driving school. So you would the first thing you would do is when you turn the game on, it'd be like, right, do you know about this stuff or do you not? Yeah. Okay, I don't. Okay, right, let's go into the driving school. Here's what a racing line is. Here's what to do here. Here's what to do there. This is what and then the manual that came with it was a big book which told you about the engineering. If you change this thing on your car, it will have this effect. It's like, great. Nowadays, Assetto Corsa Competizione, the best GT car simulator that's ever been, buy it on Steam and away you go. It's like,
yeah.
It's
well,
not
this
really
is it.
enough.
Like the closest thing I can sort of think of to that is my attempts at playing Fortnite, and obviously Fortnite is arguably the largest esport sort of title in the world, and particularly their building mechanism. If you don't know how to build, you're going to be rubbish at that game, and there is quite a steep learning curve there with it. And I think games like Fortnite do really well about catering to the masses a little bit, because if you just want to go on and you just want to burn a couple of hours and play, you don't need to know how to be a massive builder. But if you want to really put the time in and sort of learn that, you can do. But when I first started playing it and trying to learn about it, there was so much sort of snobbery around it of like, you need to do this, and you sort of end up getting turned off a little bit.
The thing is, though, yeah, and I could say everything that I've just said about sim racing, I could say about Call of Duty, because I've never got into Call of Duty, because I don't have the passing interest in that sort of in that type of game, and like guns and stuff. It's never really appealed to me. So every time I've picked up Call of Duty, outside of maybe like an offline mode where you can dumb down the experience as much as you want. Like if ever I've gone online, I've been or played with mates or whatever. It's just been a case of into the lobby, dead. Okay, right, start again. Into the okay. Do you know what? I've had enough of that. It's like I can imagine sim racing being the same. The other good thing to say is that there are amazing content creators in sim racing. Like Chris Hay, for example, he's a YouTuber that does incredible content around how to set up cars. Talks about the nuances of the different games. There's loads of content that you can find out there if you did want to get involved in it. So it's not like you're completely left out to dry. But again, it's like you say, if you want to learn it, you can, but you have to put the work in, which is kind of crazy, isn't it? When you think about it, it's like you have to put the work in to enjoy your game.
Well, that's the difference, isn't it? It's not for it's almost as if it's not for an entertainment purpose. It's for a competitive and a love for it, rather where other things are just for pure entertainment purposes.
Mate, like I say,
to keep you occupied for a few hours.
That rally game that I was telling you about, it's if you're not concentrating, you're going to have a bad time. I was playing it last night, and the rally is sort of I don't know, 12 stages or something like that. And I damaged the car on stage 4, so I had like 8 more stages of just boring. I was like, oh my god, I've just got to get this car home. It wasn't enjoyable. I was just like, this is really, really boring. But that's kind of the realism of it, is that you have to, you have to put a bit of concentration and love into it, because otherwise it just if you're like say not concentrating, or you're not on your A game, it can be not a very nice experience. But when it's good, it's amazing.
Do you sort of see a time where maybe a brand or a studio or someone sort of puts 2 and 2 together, where because things like Rocket League are just huge in the esports scene, huge on things like Twitch as well, and do you think there'll ever be a time where they sort of combine the both and try to make it more sort of flashy and more entertainment, and maybe dull it down a little bit at any point?
Yeah, well, we've got a new brand in the industry called Motorsport Games. They're part of the Motorsport Network, which are probably the biggest motorsport media network on the planet.
Aren't they owned by an F1 driver?
I don't think so.
Sponsor him or something like that.
I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. They're like the guy who runs it's a billionaire. He's putting a lot of money into this stuff. So Motorsport Games have just gone public on the stock exchange as well. So they're a big player in the industry. And they released their first game under their new brand of Motorsport Games, if you like. They just released NASCAR Ignition, and that's our first glimpse into what they might do in the future. So they've just got the Le Mans, IndyCar, BTCC, which is British touring cars, and maybe a couple more licenses. So like some big licenses which people have got a lot of expectations for. They've just released NASCAR Ignition 21, and that is using the physics engine from R Factor, which I was talking about earlier. So in principle, like fundamentally, it's like it's a proper sim, like under the hood. But they've tried to dial it back. They've tried to sort of dial it back so it's accessible to the average person just to pick up a gamepad and go, which is kind of interesting. So I think, and they've put a lot of work into the sort of the like the off-track experience. So it's not all about like on track. So there's like you're holding your iPad in your car and you're making decisions, and you've got your engineer talking to you through the window, who's become a bit of a meme because they executed that really badly. But it's they're thinking about that stuff. It goes without saying that the sim racing community haven't liked it. They've really it's been like it's got some of the worst reviews of any sim racing game because they've tried to dumb it down. We're like the hardcore sim racers, the people that have spent we haven't spent 10 grand on our rigs to have this stuff dumbed down. I think I complained to the guys at the creators of the rally sim. You can throw your car off a cliff and you get respawned on track with a 5-second penalty. It's like, no, that should be the end of my rally. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's a boring experience in that I'm not racing, but that's the level of authenticity you want. Yeah, it really is. It really is. So, but it's interesting. So I think there's there are brands that are out there that are looking at that sort of exactly that sort of thing. Is how can they make this more accessible for people? And
Mario Kart Esports.
Yeah. But I mean, but this is the thing that I again, I don't know if like the esports teams or whatever probably think I'm mad saying this stuff, but the best esports, like for racing esports that I'm aware of, is Trackmania. Are you familiar with Trackmania?
I love Trackmania.
Yeah. I like that. For me, is built for esports. That is like it's just like high intensity precision. Like it's just it's not based in the real world. I think it's built for esports, that game.
I'm going to say, when you see someone who's very, very good at Trackmania, it is just jaw-droppingly mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And it really puts me to shame.
Do you play
it? Marginally, yeah.
It's like you see some of those things that those guys are doing, and you're like, Paul, are you familiar with Trackmania?
Vaguely. I've never... Yeah, very vaguely.
It's basically like imagine like a track within a stadium, and it's you've got to get to whoever gets to the finish line first wins, obviously, but it's like a timed thing rather than like overtaking and stuff. But the track can do loop-the-loops and all sorts. But you see these guys, they're finding shortcuts.
I've just googled it. Yeah,
it's crazy, but they're flying off parts of the track which aren't. You're thinking, what the hell's he done there? Clip the rear wheel and tap the front wing, and he's doing all sorts of flips and you're like, what the hell? This is just bonkers. But again, I think that's made for esports, and I think that this is like I say, the problem that we're always going to face with motorsports esports in its current state is that we can spend thousands of pounds like on a beautiful studio and presenters and whatever, but if you get like one guy that just drives off from start to finish, it's like that's what happens in real world motorsport. That can be quite boring. But I don't know. I think sim racing, I think the esports in sim racing will inevitably get a lot bigger than what it is. I just I don't know if it's ever gonna get to that level of
Do you really want it to, though? That's the question. Do you think the community would want it to get to that level?
I'd love it to. I'm a sim racer like through and through, and if we had that sort of level of prize money, competition, exposure, and stuff, I think that would be, it'd be fantastic. I think it. I'm just trying to think if it could happen, and I think we're only going to know like in the next sort of like 10 years if people are really going to adopt it. But
it's like you say, if there are indeed studios that are for lack of a better term, they're effectively experimenting with various titles that are dumbing down, as you say, and the resultant sort of the result of that is that some of the, for lack of a better word term, elitists or purists are sort of reacting not in the most positive of ways. I suppose it can be a little bit tricky because, like you say, you want to increase that mass market appeal. You want to increase the number of eyes that are on this as a viable platform. And it's obviously now being proven that if you release something which is in any way seen as a compromise, that there's a bit of an inevitable sort of backlash to that. And so there's absolutely a bit of a tightrope to walk with that one. There has to be a bit of a juggle to sort of be had with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the problem we've got is people like Max Verstappen, who are like, he's probably going to win the F1 Drivers' World Title this year. Came out and publicly criticised the F1 game for being like basically just so unrealistic, it's like it simulates the motorsport experience quite well in that it's like the weekend and stuff like that, but actually from a driving perspective it's really dumbed down for like control console players and stuff, like like my nephews maybe like 10 at the time when he started getting into those games. Like it's got to be accessible for those players as well as people like this, and people like Max Verstappen coming out and saying, I'm never playing that game again because it's like it's not realistic. Doesn't do anything, doesn't do it any favors. It doesn't do it like the industry any favors. But
I'm going to say it's a tricky one because then it very much comes down to the definition of a game. Because by its very nature, surely it is a sense of enjoyment. It is a sense of escapism. And in some very few instances, there is a few people out there that do want that authentic simulatory sort of experience, but it has to have that mass market appeal, doesn't it?
This is a can of worms that you've just opened in the sim racing industry. Is we have like names for these games that are basically like based in real world, but they're like dumbed down, which they call them like Simcade for like you have like arcade, which would be like Forza Horizon. Then you'd have Simcade, which is something like the NASCAR or the F1 games, where it's like it's trying to replicate real world stuff, but actually has to be dumbed down. And then you've got like really like hardcore simulation, like R Factor or ACC or something like that. They all don't get me wrong. I love all of those types of games. Like even like the Forza Horizons, pick up and play just to chill out, just to have a little bit of fun. And I love that, and I love that they're the entry point for lots of people. I use the analogy of like music, and I say that like we are the weird underground electronic like techno like stuff that only like a handful of people like. Forza Horizon's like your pop music. Like that's where you might hear like a pop record which is like David Guetta or something. You go, I quite like that. What's that? It's house music. And then you get into house music or whatever and slightly more popular. And then you get into a Simcade, like an F1 title. And then you're like, I just want a little bit more realism. And then you get into like your really weird underground like niche stuff or like the hardcore sims. So it's I think I think there's a place for all of these games. I just think that if the big licenses if they all go down that Simcade route, it's going to be a question of where's the real world simulation going to come from? It's going to be an interesting 10 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's the reason that you watch esports, isn't it? You watch esports to watch the best of the best do things that you just cannot do.
Yeah, and
then you go back to your game and you try and emulate it, and then you go back and watch them. You go through that cycle over and over and over. So if stepping your way from these slightly more dumbed down games on your road to that much more realistic endpoint.
But this is the thing, right? If you actually watch an F1 esports race, like they're incredibly entertaining because they're the guys, like you say, they're the best of the best. They're best on the planet. They're the best 20 F1 esports drivers you can find. And the whole grid is like separated between like a second at most, which is just bonkers, right? In the real world, it's sort of like 3 or 4 seconds. There's differences between the cars and whatever, but in the esports, they're all the same physics and basically they drive the same. But they are so close that the racing's actually, in a lot of cases, actually better than the actual real F1 because they're so close together. But you can get those processions where it is just like they are just following each other and they don't make mistakes. And there's, you do get that. But the racing can be really entertaining. But again, it's sort of trying to get sort of the credibility in the industry again, like this. And this is the problem, like that Max Verstappen quote of "I'm never going to play this game again. It's too unrealistic." Like that was on BBC News and stuff, and it's like, wow, man, that doesn't do the the industry any favors. Just being interrupted by my son. Yeah, what I was saying was, so that quote from Max Verstappen, saying that he wouldn't want to play the F1 game again. That went on all like BBC News and everything. And that's when you're trying to build an industry with credibility, like in the sim racing industry, everyone knew what he meant. Everyone knew, like, yeah, that's a fair comment. It's like, he's gone into that event thinking that the car is going to sort of replicate what the real world cars do, and it didn't. And it meant that he was not at the front, and he was angry because he wants to win because he's a winner. And it's like that's fine, right? I get that, but at the same time, it's that headline is seen around the world as the sim racing's still just a game, and it's like there's so much more to that. Interestingly enough, Max Verstappen plays a lot of sims. Like he's an incredibly fast sim racer as well, and he could be if he wasn't an F1 driver, could be an esports driver for sure because he's that quick in esports as well. But he races a lot of sims. He races a lot of them. So it's like, that bit gets left out. The headline of the games aren't good enough gets like transmitted around the world.
Yeah, it's such a shame, and it's like video games are just toys. That one sort of gets our back up, doesn't it?
But it's also the creative aspect of it as well. It's like the people working on these games. There's no difference between like the love and the effort and the passion that goes into creating these games than there is a film or TV series or something like that. It's these guys when they get to work on a new car, like if there's a new like Ferrari or something that they've got to put into a game, it's like for a 3D modeler who's got a interest in and passion in cars and motorsport, that's like they're going to love doing that, right? The passion in development of these games is just as big as like the films and TV industry for sure.
Right. Well, it's been a very interesting talk. I don't know. Have you got any more questions, Warren?
No, I think we've pretty much covered all the bases I could think of, in all honesty.
Good
so,
stuff.
Steve, where can people find you, your company, etc.?
SimRacing.gp. There we go. Just head over there and you can sort of check us out. Also a partner at a website called racedepartment.com. It's a sim racing website. We publish news about sim racing on there. Just gone through 2 million members on there, which is pretty cool. So I think that makes us the biggest sim racing website on the planet now. You can catch me on there for sure. I'm always present on there.
Sound cool. Excellent. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me.